Seeing 12 o'clock on my end, so I think we'll get started. Thank you everyone again so much for joining us for this free webinar today. I want to thank you for joining us for the opportunity with UW-Madison's continuing education. My name is Erin Schuler. I'm the Behavioral Health Program Developer here, and you will also see Megan on the call. Megan is a Learning Experience Coordinator here with us at UW, and so is Ashley. So you will see us on the webinar today. Just a few Zoom housekeeping things kind of before we get started. We do kind of like to let everyone know, just so it's in the back of your mind, this webinar is being recorded today. So just to kind of give you a heads up. You'll also notice that you have a Q&A function as attendees today on the webinar. So Megan and myself will assist you in answering any sort of questions that you may submit that have to do with class registration, where you can find it on our website and things of that nature. So as for questions that have more to do with the content today, more for Thomas, Megan and I will compile those and we'll address them at the end of the presentation, kind of as time permits. So, as we get started, I'm very excited to introduce you all to our speaker and instructor today. Based in Portland, Oregon, Thomas Joseph Doherty is a psychologist who specializes in applying environmental perspective to mental health and well-being. His publications include the groundbreaking paper, The Psychological Impacts of Global Climate Change. And Thomas also co-hosts the Climate Change and Happiness podcast. This fall, actually just in a couple weeks, Thomas has a book coming out titled Surviving Climate Anxiety, A Guide to Coping, Healing, and Thriving that you can find at survivingclimateanxiety.com or at a bookseller near you starting on October 7th. Thomas has provided a really wide variety of workshops and trainings for organizations like Stanford University Health Services, the U.S. National Park Service, the American Psychological Association, and of course, today's webinar that you joined with UW-Madison. Now, as a reminder, if today's webinar piques your interest and you really like what you hear, we hope that you'll register for the full 3-hour course. That will be on November 5th from noon until 3 p.m. Attendees of today's webinar do have the nice opportunity that we have a promo code for you. That promo code is climate20 exclamation point to receive 20% off of that full course. All right, and so without further ado, I will hand it over to Thomas to get started on today's content.
All right. Well, thank you, Erin and Megan and Ashley and everyone at UW-Madison. And it's nice to meet you all. Yeah, we'll be talking today about my work as a psychologist working in the area of climate change and helping people cope with environmental distress and some of the difficult things in this area, but also some of the positive things in terms of our values and our identity and things that really help sustain us in difficult times. So I'm going to share my screen, and my folks at UW are going to communicate with me if there's any tech issues. But you should be seeing my title slide, and yes, there is a discount if you end up wanting to, if you enjoy this talk and you want to take the longer version. So this is a distilled version of a talk that I'm going to do in November. And often I work with mental health professionals and healthcare providers, but this is a slightly broader scope, integrating a climate conscious approach to your work with others. So this can include mental health care and broadly the healthcare field, and also educators and people working in environmental groups or just people in the general public. So I'll be using the insights from the mental health world, but this is applicable to everyone. And as I said, we're going to learn things about your own environmental identity and how you think about nature and the mental health. And we'll touch a bit on values and how people cope. And I'll use some case studies. So I'll start with some very practical things to get us situated, and then I'll step back and think about some theory and larger ways to think, and then I'll use some case studies to help give this some human story. But broadly, when we're engaging with any kind of eco issue, ecological issue, environmental issue. There's kind of three steps that we keep going around and around on in a cycle. One is really assessing our own beliefs and experiences, and again, what I'll call our environmental identity, how we think about nature, the natural world, other species in relation to ourselves. This can include positive things, things that you're proud of, things in your background, things that are sources of strength for you. But it can also include your troubled feelings, wounds and issues that you've also had in the past regarding nature, safety, the natural world. And this will become more clear as we talk. And then when you're engaging with these in your work as a healthcare provider, an educator, part of the challenge is adapting what you already know and all of your therapeutic skills that you've learned in your field in an ecological setting. So you don't have to learn everything new. It's really about applying what you already know. And then, so we adapt what we know, and then the application is really seeing how this works in the real world. For example, if you work in a school or a clinic or outpatient counseling, what literally you would do with which clientele. So I'm going to skip around a little bit in the slides, but where we're going for the future and what we'll talk about more in November is really creating your own practice map, which is how you would approach this kind of integration in your own life, personally and professionally. So some of you might open up your practices, your traditional healthcare, counseling, or educational practices to be talking about environmental issues more explicitly. So bringing nature sort of into the office. Some of you might want to integrate going outdoors or doing nature activities into your work in some form, either for health or growth or recreation. And then some of you might be researchers and studying things, or students that are looking more deeply and approaching this in a scholarly way. Some of you might be working with the public. Climate cafes that's a name for sort of a open climate discussion in the public. So some of you might be doing outreach in the public. Some of you might be working on advocacy and activism, which is an important part of the equation. And some of you might be just focusing on your own personal level actions, what you do in your own daily life, in your home. That is just as important as all of the other things, but each of us are going to have our own special recipe. And often it depends on where the barriers are and where the opportunities are. So that's something we could talk about more in detail in the future. But to jump into this more experientially, I'm going to have us do a little exercise. Any exercise I do in this talk is optional, so you can just observe or you can take part. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you're comfortable, is close your eyes and just get situated in wherever you are, in your office or in your seat or in your home. And we're going to just kind of bring some of these issues into our awareness, and I'll close my eyes and go along with you on this. And we're going to be working on this idea of congruence. That's a concept from psychotherapy, from counseling. And when someone's congruent, it simply means that their thoughts, their feelings, their gut reactions, their presentation to the world are all sort of in line, aligned. So I am presenting my inner world to the outer world openly, and I'm kind of lined up and feeling kind of in my sort of zone of comfort. And so if you want to close your eyes and do this exercise, just take a couple of breaths. It's really nice to be here. I'm really thankful for you all to take your time for this meeting and reaching across the time zones here to speak. So starting with some gratitude here that we have a moment to talk about all this stuff. We often don't have an opportunity to really sit with environmental issues in the world openly and talk about them. So that's something to be proud of for all of us, taking time for ourselves. And now I want you to imagine a place when you're very confident in your work, where you feel like you're doing what you're good at, what you've been trained for, what you feel comfortable in, a place where you feel helpful. Perhaps it's employing a certain skill set that you have, or working with a certain population of people that you feel knowledgeable about. But I want you to tap into a confident feeling when things are going well and you feel like you're being your best self. And just notice how that feels. That's often a place where we can feel congruent. We can feel like our inner and outer world are aligned, and I'm open to the world and presenting myself and clear on my thoughts and my feelings. And just notice how that feels. It's a good, generally a pleasurable place to be for people, maybe a comfort zone. So get a little flavor of that. And now I want you to imagine that you're working with someone who's bringing concerns about the environment, climate change, species extinction, toxic chemicals, forever chemicals in the environment, pollution, just any of the many environmental issues that you can imagine that are in the news, disasters, heat waves, sea level rise, infectious disease, et cetera, et cetera. Just imagine that someone's bringing those concerns to you. They're struggling, perhaps with fear or anxiety or despair, and they're asking you to help, whether it be in a classroom or healthcare setting, a counseling room, family, etc. They're asking you for help. How are you feeling about that? How are you doing in terms of being congruent? How is your inner sense of this, you know, equating with how you want to help this other person? How are you doing in terms of your confidence, in terms of your sense of having some tools or concepts or ways to help the person? There's no right or wrong answers for this exercise, but I want you just to tap into this scenario, and compare this second scenario with the first, that comfort zone scenario. Like, how are they different? I mean, if you're very lucky, you'll be in your comfort zone in both areas. But for many people, there's a distinct difference. And you can open your eyes and come back into the space. And I'll let you sit with whatever findings you got from the exercise, and perhaps we can talk about it a little later. I'm going to speak for about 20 more minutes or so, and then we'll open this up to questions and dialogue. What I have found with this exercise is that often in the second scenario, people feel less congruent and they feel less confident. And they sometimes feel very unconfident or even disempowered and not sure what to do or what to say to people. So that's kind of where we're focusing on today, how to feel better in that second scenario, and giving you some general tools and concepts. So that's our goal, is for you to feel a little more confident and get a taste of, feeling helpful, right? And then that's going to translate again into this practice map. That's going to be your roadmap. So let's think about how we can set a framework in counseling, therapy, education, discussions, public discussions, etc., that will help us talk about these complicated issues. So some general practical ground rules when you're talking about any kind of environmental issue. The first ethic rule, as in most ethics codes, is do no harm. So we definitely want to help. All of us want to help in some way, but the higher wisdom ethics-wise is to not harm someone. So we want to be aware of who we're working with, what their confidence level is, what their comfort level is, what their background is. Many of the exercises that I'll do today are quite benign, and they're usually helpful and even enjoyable, but not for everyone. So I try to be aware of, the population I'm working with. For example, if I'm working with a population or a person I know has experienced a lot of stressors in their life, environmental stressors, exposure to unhealthy environments or violence or socioeconomic inequalities or oppressions, then I'm careful with my assumptions, about their environmental identity, as opposed to someone who I know has grown up with a lot of access, to healthy nature and tends to think of nature in a positive way. So I kind of sort that out a little bit and try not to push people too far out of their comfort zone or shame them or make them feel bad about themselves. And then also anticipating the ecological nature of all these issues. Ecology meaning things are all linked together systemically. So it can be hard to stay on task if I start talking to you about, your congruence. Maybe if you're a parent, if you have children or work with young people, we start talking about young people, we might talk about positive things about young people and nature and how how wonderful it can be to work with the wonder and joy of children as they play and have magical play in nature. But then we could start talking about issues of access or danger or school systems or funding or recess or government policies, technology, cell phones, etc. And so all those things are linked together, but we can totally get drawn off into a lot of areas. So just anticipating that this is ecological. And that's the same even if you're talking with one person. You want to honor their emotions because is not just intellectual. People have strong emotional reactions to nature in the natural world, often little opportunity to talk about them or express them. So people will want to tell their personal stories. That's pretty common, and it's quite diverse. I'll talk about this idea of the climate elephant in a moment, but it's basically this idea. It's like the old story of the blind people and the elephant. They come on an elephant and they all see different parts of the creature and they think the elephant is something different. But that's the way it is with big issues like climate change or environmental issues broadly. People see them in many different ways. And all of these problems are ultimately justice problems. They are involved with our laws and our rules in society and equity in terms of the positive parts of nature and also dealing with unhealthy environments and things like that. So particularly if we have any kind of privilege and we're lucky enough to really have healthy nature around us, we have to be aware that that's not true for everyone. And around the world, the people that are on the front lines of climate change and other environmental stressors are often those that are least powerful and least privileged, and that'll just come up again and again in this work. As I talked about the elephant, this is a helpful metaphor or image. I find it helpful a lot. I'm here actually traveling in New York City for some family events and also for the Climate Week, and I'll be going to different talks and lectures, and I'm going to see this in action this week. People are going to talk about climate change. Some people are going to talk about the social justice aspects. Some people are going to talk about the science. Some people are going to talk about the economics. Some people are going to talk about product innovation. People are going to talk about solar and wind energy. Right? They'll talk about government policy. They'll talk about fossil fuel companies and propaganda, and it's all going to be true. Those are all going to be parts of the climate elephant, right? Literally, if I have a discussion with a community about climate change, or say an academic community, all of these topics can come up: technology, all the different academic disciplines, healthcare, diversity, social justice, multicultural issues, Native American, indigenous perspectives, LGBTQ, all kinds of every kind of diversity you can imagine will come around here. It's an intersectional concept, and then people will also talk about limiting climate change, adapting, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to find your way in this, and you will have a place that will be important for you. And then also your goal is to be able to speak multiple languages and to be kind of a climate cosmopolitan and be able to see different things, because we ultimately do need to join forces to work together. Let's talk about some case studies to really make this a little more prominent for us. I'm going to sort of start younger and work up. Agnes is a case study of a young person who is an activist and is very knowledgeable about climate change, knows about things like the CO2 in the atmosphere and the Keeling curve, and can be very skeptical of adults and older people who she might feel aren't taking enough action and saddling younger generations with problems. And so she's an important person to reach because her concerns are valid, but she's also needs to learn self-care and ways to take care of herself. So I would, say, Agnes, can you make a deal with me, as a counselor? Maybe I can offer you some things that actually will help you in your work, and give her some practical, concrete support. One of my sayings in this work is validate, elevate, create. We don't have to have all the answers or be an expert on climate change or people's concerns, but we can validate their concerns to say, yes, this is real, this is important, it's normal, it's natural for you to be concerned about this, and then elevate them. Let's make this the most important thing. That's a radical thing to do. If someone is coming to you and they say, well, I have concerns about all these different things in life, and I'm concerned about climate and environmental issues. And you could say, well, let's talk about those climate and environmental issues. Let's set aside your work and your family and all the other traditional things that we're taught to talk about in therapy. And let's talk about your connection with nature and your values, right? That can be very healthy for people. And then get creative. Let's get creative about this. How do you know about this? What's going on for you? What's the history of this? That's very important. The creativity is great because you're sneaking in some positive emotionality. People often come in quite anxious and depressed, concerned, kind of emotionally constricted. And creativity allows us to think and open up a little more. So we might get validate, elevate, and create or educate, get more information. Someone has a concern, you can help them to get more information about the concern and how real it is and how important it is and what to do about it. Sometimes it's validate, elevate, and moderate, like, okay, this is a real concern, but today you're doing okay, so let's work on present moment safety. So there's a lot of ways to get into this, again, without having answers, but really having a way into the space that's clean and safe and, honoring of the person. With Agnes, it was helpful for her to learn that, you don't have to solve a problem in order to cope with it. So you don't have to solve climate change, which is this huge, complicated global issue, in order to be able to cope with it. Just like how we might engage with other global issues like poverty or war or social injustice. You can work on the issue and also cope at the same time. You don't have to have all the answers. So that's helpful for a young person who can be quite concrete sometimes in their thinking. And talk openly about the climate and learn from people and just normalize talking about CO2 in the atmosphere. It's a common it's a common scientific reality. And so it's a common psychological reality, right? People do think about this stuff. Another case would be Delphina, a little older. This would be a graduate student who is, as you know, graduate students are working hard, working long hours, often have very high standards. So this is the kind of case of Delphina. She's a veterinary science student studying PFAS, forever chemicals in the Great Lakes. And really an important thing to study, but also quite troubling in terms of the information that you come across, and then makes her feel guilty about her own personal impacts in terms of climate and environmental issues. And then she develops her own sort of seasonal mood issues and sleep problems. Part of it is just the stress of graduate school, but compounded by hot, dry, smoky summers and knowledge of these environmental issues. So it leads to sleep problems and feeling bad about herself and kind of a summer sadness. And then, she comes from a Greek family in the Chicago area, very family oriented, extended family sort of situation. And so she's concerned about maybe telling her parents that she's thinking she doesn't want to have children, which would be the tradition in her family. So she's also dealing with her own family connections and things like that. So that's a common situation where people's environmental concerns overlap with family relationships and ties and alliances. With Delphina, it was helpful to say, we hurt where we care, Delphina. So if you're hurting, it's because you have values. It's because something you care about is under threat. And so that takes the focus slightly off the hurting feelings and helps to explain that they exist for a reason, that you have specific values and connections that you feel that are facing harm. So that gets people in touch with their values and some of the strengths that underlie our concerns. And then for Delphina, as for all of us, an insight was, despair is fatigue in disguise. It's one of my sayings. Is that when I'm feeling down or low, often it's because I'm tired. I need to get some rest. I need to take care of myself, because it is tough to take on these global issues and to take on issues in the news. So we really have to try to take care of our own body and our own physical situation so we can cope with these things. So, we are part of nature. So I would talk about personal sustainability. So bringing your sustainability concepts and values into your daily life and taking care of yourself as part of the ecosystem. And that was really helpful for Delphina to kind of rationalize why she needs to take care of herself.
Thomas, this has been amazing so far, and we're
Hmm.
excited to hear what else you have for us. We have about 10 minutes left of content that you'll share, and then we'll move on to that Q&A.
Perfect. Yeah. So these cases, I hope, are just perking your interest here. Larissa, another case. This would be the new mom archetype. And, as you know, parents in general, new parents are concerned about their children. And when you throw in kind of postpartum mood shifts and just physical changes, it's really easy to be hyper concerned about your children and environmental dangers. And this is not uncommon when in the era of heat waves and smoke and other environmental disasters that can be detrimental to the health of babies, right? So this is quite normal. And quite normal for people to be more attentive to disaster preparation. But in Larissa's case, she went overboard and was really, doom scrolling about environmental threats late at night, losing sleep, distracting herself, and really getting quite strung out on it. And so helping her to reframe some of her concerns. She was afraid if she didn't continually watch the news about storms or things that she would be like an ostrich with her head in the sand. That was a term that you would use. But I reminded her that ostriches actually don't put their head in the sand. That's a myth. Ostriches are quite capable creatures. They can run, they can jump, they have big claws on their feet that can lash out at an attacker. So they're quite capable. And when they're putting their heads in the sand, they're often tending to their eggs. So really, helping her to realize that moderate her concerns, tend to her children, and realize that there's time and place to do coping, right? And realize that the disasters of the past aren't necessarily happening right this moment. So kind of what we call reclaiming your nervous system. Overwhelmed is normal. It is overwhelmed if you are open to the world. That's just where we would start. And there's a political piece here. Now, I introduced a term called climate hostage some years ago about just to capture the feeling people have of being stuck in a world where the politics and business and fossil fuel companies are kind of stopping change. Unfortunately, that's more true than ever here currently. And what we have is a situation where politics can lead to a downward spiral in your life. We have denial and confusion about global climate change and this inevitability myth about using fossil fuels and personal responsibility. And this can overlap with people's thinking styles in terms of, oh, society's doomed, I'm not doing enough, I'm a bad person. And then when they see stressors in the media and they see news about disaster, it can lead to a downward spiral. And then if you throw in isolation, that really puts people at risk for eco-anxiety, eco-despair. So we have to have a growth mindset and help people to realize we can grow, we can change, we can learn new things. In my book, I have a coping process that is quite comprehensive. And this is something I'll talk about more in November. But it entails this opening up process, kind of what we've been talking about today, learning how to think about environmental issues, working on our feelings expression and emotional intelligence, reclaiming our nervous system and the sense of stress reduction, and then also looking at our climate impacts and creating our own climate impact report. And then getting into our environmental identity, telling our personal stories, our sense of place, our family background, and things like that. So, this is the base that we want to get to. And then, talking about environmental well-being and what it would mean to be happy. How would we take care of ourselves, have healthy relationships, access the arts, creativity. And then, of course, there's talking about eco-distress and despair. And then people always want to know about action. What can I do personally? And so what tends to happen is that people will come in the door with the eco-distress, and that's what's driving the bus in the short run. But if we spend time talking about basic coping, and in particular doing their own climate impact report, really starting to be honest about how climate change affects them personally, and working on emotional intelligence and stress reduction. That's really stabilizing. And then the gift of environmental identity and helping people understand their own personal background, nature, experiences, places they love, why they care, how this is something that maybe they came in their family or what's important to them in their family now, and a little sense of navigating the politics. Then they're really getting a base. A lot of people have forgotten or they are not sure what it means to be happy in this time, and is it okay for me to be happy, given all these issues, and how to find an ethical place there. That's a huge gift. And then thinking about, well, what would I do in terms of my own, like in your own practice map or so in someone in their own life, and it starts inside. My actions are going to ultimately flow from my environmental identity and my values, where I'm situated, and what I'm capable of doing. It's not what other people tell me to do. It's what's coming out of me, what's inside of me. And then looking at the barriers, and then that gets into that whole sort of adaptation where we take our skills and we try to work on them. And that's really a trial and error process. But once you start getting people going in that, almost like magic, the eco distress goes down because they're actually doing healthy things. All of us are going to have eco distress. You can't erase it. I mean, the world is dangerous in many ways, and we've got a lot of important things going on. So feelings of distress are normal. But what we can replace is unhealthy, uncontrolled, pathological feelings of distress that are inhibiting people's health or stopping them from being their best self. That's what we can kind of shrink. And that's kind of the general process. And again, this is what I go back in time here in my slide. It's what I talk about in my book. So when I talk about surviving climate anxiety, it isn't just about the anxiety, it's really about the coping, healing, and thriving. And once you work on coping, healing, and thriving, the anxiety will often shrink down to its more normal level of an adaptive feeling. So that's generally the overview. And I know I covered a lot of ground, but keep in mind the basic things: validate, elevate, create, despair is fatigue in disguise, we hurt where we care. This isn't rocket science. Some of you were already aware of this, but it's nice to remind ourselves of it and create a place where we might want to talk more. So I'll stop with my slides now, and we can open it up to some questions and dialogue.
Thank you so much, Thomas. That was amazing content. It was great to kind of get into it and have some exercises even that we got to do. So you'll see on this slide, you can see the information about the full course. Um, I want to clarify, I misspoke in my introduction. There is no punctuation needed on that promo code. So you'll see it right there on the right-hand side of the screen in the blue letters. You can use code CLIMATE20 when registering for that 20% discount if you are interested in what you heard today. So Thomas, I do have some questions for you that we were able to gather from our Q&A. So we did have one attendee ask, what do we do with people who describe their relationship to nature and the environment as non-existent or even non-important?
Yeah, I think and it's funny. That's like when we're doing this work, we want to be aware that there's going to be a range of, say, people we'll talk to. Like if any of you in the group are family therapists, you'll know in traditional family therapy, the general rule of thumb is you start to work with the person who's most wanting to work with a therapist and most amenable to thinking about their behavior, and then you move to the people that are more entrenched or less likely to want to change. And so that's if I'm finding a if I'm finding a person who really doesn't have an environmental identity, I feel like they're on a spectrum, because most people I've found when I talk about environmental identity almost immediately kind of start telling me, oh yeah, well, I grew up in Chicago, or I grew up on the West Coast, or I grew up, my grandfather had a farm. And so most people and this is across socioeconomic status, political status, people will understand what you mean about nature and health. So try to focus on those people first because that's where you're going to have more leverage talking about this. If someone says the environment, natural environment is not important to them, well, that's fine. That's their belief. You know, I find that most people, when you talk about it openly, will have some connection with nature. I've not found people that hate animals or hate nature. Some people are more city people or urban people, and they don't feel comfortable camping or hiking, and so that will manifest in a kind of pushing away of nature because there's a stereotype that to be connected with nature, you have to be some sort of tree-hugging camper with a backpack or something like that. So I find that I would just go softly with people like that and not push that and say, I mean, it's okay. You could say, well, for me, it's quite important and it's a big part of my identity. And then, often when you validate your own self and you don't shame or push people, then they'll be more curious. So just kind of be careful. It's a common, I think, approach to try to go to the worst case scenarios in this work and really work with the most entrenched people. And there's a pull to do this, but strategically, we want to work with the people that are more our allies so that we can actually connect with and join with to work on positive change.
Thank you, Thomas. That's very helpful. Another question I have here is I'm ready to bring this practice into my work, but I don't know how to get started. So where's the best place for me to begin?
Well, it's a good question too. Kind of depends. It kind of depends on your work. I think what I what's helpful now, as opposed to say 20 years ago, is that most areas of education or healthcare or counseling do have initiatives regarding health benefits of nature, or dealing with disasters, or dealing with environmental distress. So I would try to find whatever programs are existing within your discipline and some benchmarks or some examples. And sometimes you can reach out directly to those people and make a connection with them, or you could bring that into your work. Say, for example, you're in a counseling center and you approach the director. It's one thing to say, I want to do nature-based therapy, or I want to connect people with nature. People might not be sure how to approach that, even if they're philosophically, supportive of it. But if you say something along the lines of, well, I've seen this, empirically based program being used in counseling at these other counseling centers where they're doing outdoor walking and things like that, and I'm wondering if we could pilot a program like this in our center. And you're bringing it in with a sense of something that's already vetted and something that's got some empirical support and that is, conventional and already being used. That's a much easier way to bring things into your setting. So I would think about doing some of your homework. Even if people don't read all of your citations and your references, if you have a list of references, it's very powerful because they'll tend to trust you a little more.
Wonderful. That's great advice. And then the last question I have here for today is how do I take care of myself when working with clients that might be anxious about climate change when I am facing similar anxieties about climate change?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really great question because it is we are prone to vicarious trauma and things like that. And that's kind of where I get at with that validate, elevate, create thing. We have to do that for ourselves, right? So validate our own beliefs, our own feelings, and elevate them. What can I do to take care of myself? Like with most therapy activities, we have to do our own work first. I don't have to be totally perfect or complete. I'm a work in progress. So recognize that you're a work in progress. You're taking steps to understand your environmental identity and to deal with your own personal footprint and things like that. And then set that aside. Set that aside and just be there for the person. Validation has value, like I say, just validating the concerns. You'd be surprised It's not your job to solve people's problems, just as in any kind of counseling. It's your job to create the circumstances where they can be, where they can be their best self. In November, I'll get more into some of the emotional expression work and emotional intelligence. But one tip that I use and in which you can use as a counselor when you're preparing, I ask three questions emotionally. What am I feeling? Which is important. So that's emotional intelligence, emotional expression. So that can be very helpful. And then the second question is, what do I want to be feeling? That's a little more radical. Like, what feelings do I want to have? Do I want to cultivate? And so that will open up other kinds of feeling states that we might want to have. Like, I want to feel present or aware or patient or confident or strong or courageous or grateful. And that'll sort of open up different feeling states. And then the third question is, what should I be feeling? Like, where's the growth? What's the normal and natural thing for me to be feeling? Sometimes it's natural to feel down. Other times it's natural if I'm in a beautiful sunny day and I'm, visiting family and I'm out in the park, I should be able to feel good. So doing that emotional regulation yourself as a therapist is very helpful. And then you can just be present and help other people also. So think about, what are you feeling? What do you want to be feeling? And where's the growth? Where's the wisdom? Where do I need to be feeling? And that'll get you going.
Thank you, Thomas. That was a good end to our discussion today. And thank you, everyone, for submitting questions. I also see some comments, people thanking you, Thomas. They enjoyed the
You're
topic.
welcome.
Very interested, excited for the additional course that will, the full version of this course. Megan did send a chat message just reminding you all that course is going to take place Wednesday, November 5th from noon to 3 p.m. It'll be online just like this format in Zoom and with that promo code that you can use. So I see some more thank yous in the chat. Really appreciate you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone, for spending your lunch hour with us to kind of get the preview of this course that we'll be offering in November. We hope that you'll seek out other continuing education opportunities with UW-Madison, and maybe we'll see you in November. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks you. Take care.